now. Okay, so if anyone has a problem with being recorded for their face, please feel free to turn your cameras off. And we will absolutely respect that. If you need to jump off the Zoom because it's being recorded, we completely understand as well. Again, my name is Jennifer Wondroth-Holster, the Executive Director here at the Women and Family Life Center. On behalf of everybody here, we just want to thank you for joining us. We do want to thank a couple of people who extra special for joining us today. So those who have RSVP, they may not be on yet, but we'll be jumping on. Our Representative Rader, Maura Rader's Legislative Aide Victoria Bauer, Representative John Michael Parker, Representative Delaney, Senator Caciarella, Representative Belton, Representative Comey, Representative Gilchrist, Representative Hughes, Representative Yacarino, Senator Marks, Representative Ankintavanich. We also have Representative Larson's aide here joining us. We also have Ellen Graham, who is Senator Richard Blumenthal's community liaison. We have Greg Hannon, who is filling in for Representative Candelora. And we also have Ellen McBride, who's here for Chris Murphy's office. We also are wanting to welcome Senator Christine Cohen, as well as Senator Norm Needleman. So thank you all so much for being here. Also for the sexual assault or the Shoreline Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Task Force, all of our amazing members and partners who are also here joining us, as well as our speakers. And I know we do also have Beth Hamilton from the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence, who's going to be talking about some of the things that they have going on for their legislation time coming up, as well as Liza, who is from the the Connecticut Coalition Ending Domestic Violence. So thank you both for being here and everyone as well. Right now, I'd like to pass it on to my colleague. So Melissa George, who is our program manager, as well as Melanie, who is one of our referral navigators here, Melanie Myers. So I'm going to put myself on mute and let them take it away. So please feel free to also put any questions in the chat. And I know Melanie and Melissa will go over some quick little housekeeping things. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you everyone who has made it today. I just want to take a moment right now to ask folks to type in the chat what agency they're from, if that is relevant, as well as take some time to rename yourself to your name if possible. That would really help us keep track of who is attending today. So I want to take this moment to introduce our speakers, as well as give an introduction to our task force. So I'd like to introduce Officer Lauren Greeley. She is our Guilford Police Domestic Violence Liaison. Ann Malisk, the Director of Sexual Assault Crisis Services at Women and Families Center in Meriden. And Ashley Starr Frechette, Director of Health Professional Outreach at Connecticut Coalition to End Domestic Violence. So I want to take a moment to thank all the speakers that are coming today. Thank you so much. And I'd like to also as well explain our Shoreline Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Task Force. So our task force, the mission of our task force is to provide education, coordinate resources, and aid in the prevention of domestic violence and sexual assault across Shoreline communities. Our task force is made up of several members, including domestic violence advocates, sexual assault advocates, local municipalities such as police departments, private practitioners, and community members who are very passionate about these topics. So that's really what our task force is responsible for. We kind of come together once a month, and we have been holding every April and October community events to help bring awareness around domestic violence and sexual assault. And every December we hold this roundtable to encourage legislators to come together and hear us, hear what we've seen on the front line. But I'm going to give Melissa George, our program manager and supervisor, an opportunity to explain a little bit more about this roundtable and what we can expect this morning.
Thanks, Melanie. I'm Melissa George, Program Manager here at Women and Family Life. So thank you all for joining us today. A little bit about what today's roundtable is about. I know a lot of you have participated in past roundtables. This is our sixth one. But for those of you who have not, kind of what is today really about? So today, joining us, we have community professionals, community members, politicians, lawmakers, all sorts of people in our community who are key players in ending domestic violence and sexual assault. So today's purpose is really to talk about what the task force members talk about monthly, different issues that we see, different concerns within the community that deal with domestic violence and sexual assault. And we want to create change. So the goal of today is to come out of this with knowledge, legislation, regarding domestic violence and sexual assault. So for those of you who have joined us before, there's a lot of discussion. This is a safe space for people to share their ideas, their thoughts, different experiences that they've had. So we all need to be respectful of that. And know that this is being recorded. So please just keep that in mind. So thank you to everybody who joined us today. And now we're going to jump right into it. So I'm going to throw it back over to Melanie, who's going to introduce us to our first topic of discussion.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks so much. So Lauren Greeley will start us off, and she'll be explaining why courts should provide free guardian ad litem to family law cases in need of them. Then we'll transition into Ann Malisk, who will be discussing why guardian ad litem should receive mandated trauma, domestic violence, and sexual violence trainings to help them better understand and represent children in these difficult situations. So Lauren, I'll hand it off to you, and then Anne, please feel free to step in afterwards.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Officer Lauren Greeley. As you said before, I'm with the Guilford Police Department and also the DV liaison. So I want to talk a little bit about the Guardian Liaison, or GAL. So the GAL is an attorney that a judge appoints to represent the child's best interest in the court system. So if for parenting related issues, if parents can't come to agreement during that divorce proceeding, the judge can appoint one. So in the law enforcement aspect of it, as law enforcement, we have interactions with families long before these decisions of divorce and separation and the court processes begin. And we feel that children are the most utilized weapons during those divorce processes and are often neglected in terms of their individual wants and needs. So this GAL is appointed by the judge or a motion by the parent or the request of the child. But we strongly believe that it's not only a necessary part of the family court process, but should be mandatory. But along with that, the parties are currently in the case are responsible to pay the fees for the GAL, and they're either by the state pay, a sliding scale, or private pay. So the parties are responsible on their own. And that sliding scale, which I've seen, is only based on a parent's combined gross income of less than $39,062, which is well below the poverty line, and it only assumes one child. So it falls below the 125% of federal poverty guidelines. So parents that fall above that limit, they're expected to pay for it privately. So the court then will determine how payment is to be split. Unfortunately, and ultimately, we should recognize that children matter in this, and this should be provided to them regardless of income and not an extra thing that they have to worry about. Anne, do you want to speak on that?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here at this platform. It's many people. This is great. I just want to speak on behalf of, right now, I'm currently the Director of Sexual Assault Services at Women and Family Center. But for many years before this, I also worked as a child advocate. And I have been involved with the court process for a very long time with children. And I have seen children with amazing GALs many times over the years. But I've seen some really difficult, complicated cases where the aspects of abuse were so complex. The average person, until you actually like work with this every day, you might not recognize some of the dynamics that the children are facing at the time and the pull between the parents that they might be having. Because sometimes as we all know, domestic violence doesn't always appear the way you would think. And sometimes the person being abused comes across differently. And they're not always looked at as a victim as well. So it does complicate these cases. I want to speak more directly to some of the sexual assault cases I have dealt with where it was a guardian or a parent involved and there was a GAL in the case. I had one specifically once where the young lady was about, I don't know, 16 or so, she was 17. She was about to be 18 soon, which is one of the reasons I was really wondering why the court was taking this so far, because this young lady had the ability to say, I don't want to see this parent, and had not seen this particular parent for a while. It was her father, and he had sexually abused her for years, but he was not convicted of it. They didn't pursue an investigation for certain reasons. That happens a lot in these cases. It does not mean someone is not guilty of sexual violence. And when I went to court for this case, it was really apparent that the GAL was really having trouble understanding the dynamics. And I think that in that specific case, I know for sure, they were seeing mom as possibly the one saying that she didn't want to see her father. I ended up testifying in that specific case, whereas the I was able to speak on behalf of the young lady to say that she clearly had said to me on many occasions she didn't want to see her father. But it was really complicated. That young lady had been put through many things that she shouldn't have had to go through after already experiencing such long-term abuse. This is only one of many examples, and I can't speak directly to certain things, obviously for confidentiality reasons, but I have seen many examples where DCF has been involved, GALs have been involved. There's more than one GAL, there's a different GAL for each child sometimes, and it gets very confusing and complicated. And if they were to have more training on trauma, the dynamics of sexual violence, the dynamics of the power and control and things like that, I really feel strongly they would be able to do a much better job representing young people in court, because sometimes most of the time, many times, they can't even articulate what's going on around them because it's so confusing for them. And so if GALs had training, they might be able to know how to ask questions differently, or how to approach some of the conversations they have with these young people in a different manner. Because most of the time someone's not going to say directly what's going on with them, because they've been taught for so long not to speak about this. So that's just my part in this. I would love to, I could tell you about lots and lots of cases. We don't have time for that today. But I'm happy to speak to anyone more directly if you'd like to outside of this forum. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anne and Lauren, for sharing all that important information and your experience. I want to open it up to any questions, comments, anyone who wants to share anything on this topic. Please go right ahead and speak right now. And it also looks like, Anne, someone's asking for your email address.
I don't know. Is my microphone working well?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Martina Jacober with the Guilford Police Department. And to add, to the point that Officer Greeley's making, it's very apparent that many parents going through divorce are unfortunately utilizing children as weapons in these situations. And I know with Jennifer's Law, we're trying to recognize that financial abuse and emotional abuse is a huge component in a lot of domestic violence situations. So with that, in these financial situations where somebody might be well off, their finances are very high, so they don't meet any of these categories for free services, and they're not being given access to funds to get guardian ad litems, it becomes a big problem. And so I think that the point in bringing this up as a concern is that we shouldn't be cutting costs at the expense of children. We know that these cycles of violence exist, and they exist generationally. And if we don't stop it, if we don't get these kids the help they need and the guidance they need and the safe locations for their futures, it's going to be a problem, and it's going to just continue. So I think it's really important that the court recognize the need for these assignments regardless of their finances, because it's such an important feature where kids are abused and can't talk about it, to Anne's point as well. So I think it's critical. So I'm glad that the session is willing to listen to that concern, because it's a big component of what we see. As Officer Greeley said, from beginning to end, we get there for the first events in the family problems, and we're there long after they're over. You know, we have been in Guilford for almost 21 years. I've known families now generationally. So it's important. It's probably one of the most important things that we should be looking at. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. I see a couple hands. If whoever raised their hand first, I apologize, I wasn't keeping track. And then just speak and go right ahead.
I believe Jillian Gilchrist had her hand raised first. So Jillian, if you're there.
Go ahead.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'll be on video soon. My apologies. Thank you for hosting this today. My question has to do with, do you think that by training, having specialty training for the guardians ad litem, that would help the judges as well? Like, is there a knowledge, I would assume there's a knowledge gap with the judges too? Have we already passed training for them, or would that kind of be an additional thing? Or do you think this would help with that? I hope that makes sense.
I'll speak on that a little. I think it could help with the judges. I don't think it would hurt. It's not part of this platform to have judges have more training too. But I think they do rely on the GALs in these cases to really understand what's going on within the family for the child. So that would be a start.
I will say, a couple of years ago, we had brought to this forum to try to have more training about domestic violence for the judges. If I'm remembering correctly, that didn't go all the way through, but I think most folks on this forum would agree that that would be great if that could happen as well. But yes, I've also worked with some GALs who were not aware of all of the things that were at play in the situation that they were dealing with. So I agree that this is a really important issue, and that there have been families that needed the GALs who didn't have them. Thanks.
I'll just quickly jump in and agree with Emily, because when we passed Jennifer's Law, there was tremendous pushback from the judicial branch on training for numerous reasons, and we decided to take it out of the bill in order to move it forward.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It has been a hot topic as well at our roundtable for a few years, in fact. So I think it's important to start these conversations and also to understand, what it looks like on the legislative end. So thank you, Senator Christine Cohn, for adding that piece. Paola, you had your hand up as well. Did you want to speak to something as well?
Morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. So if we really, on this topic, if we really think about it, GALs are the advocate or the voice of that child. And so if they are not properly trained on the complexities of domestic violence and sexual assault, then they cannot advocate to the judge. So I do agree that judges need further training. But it's really a systems change of training judges, the GALs, the Family Relations Office, and other entities that make decisions on and also the Department of Children and Families, which sometimes are also involved in these court cases, and understanding domestic violence and sexual assault and the trauma, and why there are certain moments within the court process that clients become intimidated and afraid. And so they don't voice everything that's going on because we no longer as advocates are able to, present for the client, which is something that had happened many moons ago, a few decades ago, regarding where advocates could assist the client during the court hearing to be able to not just sit back, but actually help them be able to use that voice. And so when we think about financial abuse, right, it's a multifaceted, holistic situation, because oftentimes what happens is that the abuser uses the court system to further abuse and intimidate that client. And so they use that system to be able to have that power and control. We're talking about women fleeing from abuse that are not even allowed to have a key in their home, to be able to have access to cars, to the house without the abuser. And so what happens is when they flee abuse, they don't have the financial assistance and resources to be able to leave safely. As we know, when a victim of domestic violence leaves abuse, that is the most dangerous time. That is when people actually get killed. And so this is an essential part that I think legislation needs to look at, is one, financial abuse, and how can we put more mandates within our bills and regulations, and two, the type of training that needs to be holistic in the court system. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. That is a very serious issue. We notice a lot of litigation abuse stories, unfortunately, from just several calls we've gotten regarding them. So I appreciate you bringing up the systemic change that needs to happen. I want to bring notice as well to a question that Senator Martha Marks has as well. We can go into that and then we'll have to switch over to the second topic. So I'll just read it out loud. Is there a shortage of GALs? As a freshman legislature, can you explain who they are, qualifications, as well as who supervises them? Does anyone have any answers regarding this question?
I can jump in quick as a family law attorney. I do think there's a shortage. I think a lot of attorneys, it's hard to find people who want to do it, to be honest. And I just had another comment. Financial abuse has been brought up a couple times. Taya might agree with me on this one. A lot of women, before we even get to the GAL point, a lot of women don't have access to any funds to hire an attorney themselves. So for them to hire someone who can then advocate for a guardian ad litem in their situation is a real problem. So some women don't even have the opportunity to get into court at all, or at least not have good representation because their abuser's not allowing them access to any money. So I just want to kind of point that out. I see that all the time.
Could I ask a quick question? It's Representative Moira Rader. On that, so there is no funding mechanism in place for these women to seek out free legal counsel.
There is not in the family law sector. They would have to look for a pro bono attorney. And to be quite honest, there are not many attorneys who will work on a low cost or no cost fee schedule in a highly contested case. And family relations is just completely overloaded in the court system. So
I want to step in and share our experiences. We receive almost on an everyday basis, folks asking for pro bono family law attorneys, and we turn not something that I want to do. It's horrifying, but we have to turn so many folks away. We give them, consult information, education, resources, but it's something that is in dire need. And unfortunately, there just aren't resources out there for it. So I know folks still have questions, and I just want to ask if you can hold on to them, please. We will have a Q&A session after. We want to give time to our second topic. So if Melissa, if you can just step in, introduce our second topic, and then we will keep going from there. Thank you so much, everybody, for all your great questions and conversation so far.
Thanks, Melanie. And Paula, I see you, we hear you, and we will have a Q&A portion after the second topic for you to share your thought, I promise. So jumping right into the second topic, that is going to be the mandatory distribution of domestic violence information to postpartum patients within birthing hospitals and possibly birthing centers. So I'm going to throw this over to our speaker, Ashley, to take it away.
Thanks so much. Good morning. Thank you everyone for having me. As it was said before, my name is Ashley Starr-Burchett. I'm the Director of Health Professional Outreach at the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And through our Health Professional Outreach program, myself, our HPO project manager, and our 18-member organizations work really hard to address the areas of need within all of the healthcare sectors. Unfortunately, we know that intimate partner violence is more common for women in the United States than breast cancer and diabetes combined. These are all topics that we continuously get asked about or get resources on, but we very rarely get resources on intimate partner violence itself. So as a part of my role, I also serve on the Maternal Mortality Review Committee for the state of Connecticut. And through this role, it became very clear that intimate partner violence was extremely prevalent, yet few resources or screenings were done for individuals that are pregnant or up to 1 year postpartum. IPV is a public health crisis, and nationally, intimate partner violence is the leading cause of traumatic death for pregnant and postpartum women. Pregnancy and postpartum period are a crucial time to ensure that healthy relationship resources are getting into every birthing person's hands. Through our last report that we just published back in April through the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence Maternal Mortality Project, we found that of the 102 individuals that lost their life due to a pregnancy-related death, 32% of those individuals had lifetime IPV, and that was from 2015 to 2021. So we know that far too many individuals were affected by intimate partner violence, yet only one individual was actually referred to our services. And so these findings indicate a really strong need for standardized resources and getting information into people's hands. I say all of this today to point to this glaring hole that we can easily fix by having a bill passed like the one we're talking about today, where mandated resources would be given at every birthing hospital as everyone's discharge packet. We have the opportunity to provide preventable resources through this bill. It would ensure that every hospital and obstetric provider are provided with safe and effective IPV resources that can be distributed upon discharge of every pregnancy. The resources are developed by CCADV and the Maternal Mortality Review Committee, and our amazing advocates across the state do this all the time, helping educate and support individuals in the rollout of these things. These are validated health education tools that we utilize in hospitals all the time. And providing education is a safe and effective way to let people know what healthy relationships should look like, and then what are the resources that are here in the state of Connecticut. So it's our goal that no pregnant or birthing person will leave their birthing hospital or birthing center without a resource to know where they can get support for their relationships if it becomes unhealthy. I think it's a really important step to better support all birthing people in the state of Connecticut and to address that issue of maternal mortality that we have here in the state. So it's our hope that we can gain support for this bill, and hopefully we can get this information into every person that has a child in the state of Connecticut. So thank you very much for my time.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Does anybody have any comments, thoughts, or questions regarding this topic?
Melissa, I'm sorry, I can't find you would think by now I could figure out, there's all sorts of new buttons at the bottom of my screen. So I'll work on that in a second and figure out where my hand raise button is. Ashley, I'm just curious, has this ever been brought up before to your knowledge? And is there any, has anybody done sort of rough costs associated with providing these resources? And if so, who would be paying for it? Are you looking for state funding for these resources?
I can speak
Thank
to
you.
that a little bit. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Please, Ashley. I'll go after you.
We did try to pass this last year, and we did look at the costs associated, and there are ways to ensure that there's no cost, but it would be DPH that would be fronting that if we actually give out the physical resources.
Okay. Do you recall what there was a fiscal note on it for DPH, or there was not? Oh, Sean Michael's shaking his. Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, Rep. Parker. Do you wanna take it?
Oh, Liza, I bet you have the number right in your head. I was going to say, I think it was in the order of like 200,000 to 300,000.
Well, yeah, so that
in a way that might have been a little bit inflated.
Separate piece too that we're removing from the bill. So the print cost, Senator, the print cost to go to all hospitals would have been around 70,000, so that they would have the physical document to hand out.
Okay, so 70,000 per year. Great, thank you.
I'd also just like to note there was a comment and question from Wendy in our chat about giving out resources and how equipped are medical providers like doctors, lactation consultants, et cetera, people who are working with postpartum people to identify red flags, and how many hospitals and birthing centers engage in IPV training. I don't know if anybody has any further information on any of that they'd like to speak to.
I can answer that. So we here in the state of Connecticut, we have 18 member organizations, and 10 of which have health professional outreach advocates who do amazing education every single day out in the community. We educate health professionals on a daily basis. We also offer CEUs, CMEs. So we have we are able to educate thousands of health professionals each year with that resource. So they also are required, social workers and physicians are required through their educational standards to have an hour or 2 hours of IPV education every few years. So, I mean, we obviously need to continue to always reach as many health professionals as we can, but we are doing you know, what we can to try to get as much information into everyone's hands as possible. So trying, you know, every avenue that we can.
I do think I just want to just say for legislators too, Ashley kind of brings up a good point in her response to this important question. There are often, you know, we know that medical providers, a lot of professionals have a lot of training requirements. So we do often see bills that seek to reduce the amount of continuing education they need and to strip away some of those specific topics, because they receive continuing education related to their kind of specific field within healthcare. But then there are those few topics that all have to receive, domestic violence being one of them. So we all just always want to be on the lookout for folks who recommend taking away that 1 hour they are required to get on domestic violence, I believe, every 3 to 6 years. So just always on the lookout for that.
Thank you. There was another question in our chat. Would this include screenings or assessments for coercive control for birthing women or birthing people? I don't know if somebody can speak to that, Ashley.
So this bill doesn't actually touch on the screening portion. It touches on the resources. So the resources that would be provided would be the Futures Without Violence, Connected Parents, Connected Families. So it just talks on what's healthy and what's not. So whatever is in that little pamphlet is what would be given to each patient. So it doesn't actually include the screening portion.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, thoughts about this specific topic that they'd like to touch on?
Hey, it's Rep. Parker from Madison, Durham, the 101st. Thanks for having us today, for all the work that you folks do. And glad to hear this conversation happening. Liza and I were running around at 11:55 on the last day of session, trying to figure out why this didn't get called in the Senate. So Senator Cohen, let's have a conversation. And this is going to be a priority of mine for this session on the Public Health Committee. So if anyone is interested in working on it, please reach out to me. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Hi, it's Senator Marks, and I guess we senators don't know how to raise our hands. I can't find it either. Senator Cohen.
Hi, Senator Marks.
John Michael, get over here and show me how to do it. So good to see you. So I am a nurse and I've worked in maternal child health before. And I actually did my hour training yesterday on domestic violence. You know, and you do roll your eyes saying, oh God, here I go again. You know, it's 40 years, you know, I've been a nurse, but then after I do it, something else comes up. Although those are good, and you'll learn to hear. I will be an advocate for nurses. If I was on the news last night, there is so much we need to advocate for, but we need hands-on. We need role playing with so many different parts of healthcare that just watching a video at home while you're folding the laundry doesn't always do it. And I really, really wish for things that are so important. I can tell you in all my years of nursing, I've never considered somebody being a domestic violence victim, and I'm sure that I've missed things. So although those computer modules are good, and boy, the hospital association would hate us, but I really do think that we need to do some kind of role playing and make it much more interactive and have a safe space for healthcare workers to give their stories, to ask, hey, do you think I missed something here? So that's just my 2 cents. I know there's a lot of experts here that hopefully will kind of agree with me.
Thank you so much. Paula, I saw your hand go up, and then Representative Rader, you're next.
So one of the things that with CCADV and the Hope Center and Umbrella as well on this part of the Connecticut is really what's been the most effective is warm handoffs. So warm handoffs are when you're actually connecting directly to a human being. I think a lot of times nurses and the ER especially really don't know when that moment comes, how to screen, how to ask the words, and Ashley and her team do go out to the hospitals to do that type of training. But 1 hour is not enough. And just like the senator said, it needs to be a more collaborative type of approach. So one of the things that I think is important is to have, and I don't know if it can fit in legislation, where the emergency room and also the nurses that are taking care of clients have a mandated or, you know, elective where they can have an hour specific with a member agency or a domestic violence group, so they can ask those safe questions and then actually give them a human being that they can connect to, so that they can feel like build that trust, so that they have a safe space to talk about what the cases that are coming in. And another piece too is the Yale Violence Intervention Program. So again, this neck of the woods are starting to come on site at programs. So they come to the Hope Family Justice Center. That creates a symbiotic kind of relationship. So when an issue comes up that is a maternal issue or somebody is pregnant, they're able to screen at that moment and then connect directly with that warm handoff. Just as
Thank you, Paula. Representative Rader, I think you had your hand up next.
Thank you. This just dovetails off of that question, and you may not be able to answer this, but to the point of nurses, I know you spoke about medical providers like doctors having like an hour required every few years, but do we know if nursing students have this as part of their curriculum? And you guys may not be able to answer this, and I realize that we obviously want to get them once they're in the atmosphere of an ER or, you know, working with a new mother, but I'm just curious if there's any curriculum requirement in our state that that nursing students experience this education. Or if not, what is the requirement for registered nurses or APRNs? And again, if you can't answer, I can look elsewhere for the answer, but it's just, I'm wondering if this is something we should consider.
Ashley, I see you were about to
Yeah.
unmute. So if you can speak to that, please do.
Yeah, so we currently do through our health professional outreach advocates, we do try to outreach to all of our nursing programs in the state as much as we can. They're probably one of our most enthusiastic groups of actually getting the education. They only have a very small amount, like it's usually within the public health section of their training. And I think there's like 1 or 2 questions maybe on their boards about intimate partner violence. So it's something we definitely at CCDV, I need to do more to make sure that we get push that further as we continue on with this, because, many times the nurses are the ones that are actually speaking and hearing these stories. So.
Thanks so much.
Anybody else? Any last minute questions or thoughts on this topic?
I have something.
Yeah, go ahead.
So obviously we have, Yale is got the clinic here in Guilford, and many other doctors and offices here in our community. But I think maybe even utilizing, most agencies now have their own domestic violence instructors that are post-certified. So perhaps an opportunity to utilize that resource to do some of those educational components for the local medical areas. It can kind of bring in what we see on the road and how it might show up in one of their offices, more like a real life experience, day to day. I mean, I'm just outside the box kind of here thinking of who we have available to do a lot of this educational component. And for us police officers, a lot of us are, have in-service training, and those in-service training is based on a lot of experience. So it might be helpful that way too.
Thank you, Martina, for sharing your thoughts. All right. Well, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it back over to Melanie, who's going to kind of lead us into our question and answer summary portion of today's events.
Thanks, Melissa. And thank you everybody who's had amazing questions. We love the engagement. I just appreciate how involved everyone is in this conversation. So I'm going to open it up to any questions that folks may have. I know some folks had some questions left over from our first topic. This is just in general, any questions that we have regarding those 2 topics, as well as additional questions. So please, anyone, just feel free to unmute. You can raise your hand if you'd like, but you can also unmute if you'd like. So this is your moment.
Don't everybody talk at once. Perfect. Senator Marks.
Yeah, hi. So just going back to the GALs. So they're contracted by the state. And then what if they're not really good at what they do? Who do they get to continue to work, or are they supervised by anybody?
I know somebody has some thoughts on that, so please feel free to jump in. Who is knowledgeable about that?
I'm happy to jump in as a former GAL.
Thank you, Taya.
And so please, if anything that I'm saying is dated, let me know. But as a GAL, you can be a therapist or an attorney, and there is a state-provided training for folks who are interested and accepted into that program. There was a lull in those trainings pre-COVID and through COVID. So you will see fewer GALs available. GALs can be paid in 2 ways. There might be a state rate that I think was mentioned if a family qualifies, but those are pretty strict qualification requirements. I think it was said substantially under the poverty level. So what we're seeing is that GALs need to be paid by the clients themselves. So mom and dad. So you can imagine if this is a situation where there's financial coercion, it's going to be really hard to get the funding from mom and dad for that, or from parent to parent. Don't want to be too gendered here. Next, most families cannot afford hiring their own attorneys and then being responsible for the split cost of a GAL. So I hope that answers a couple of the questions. And the GALs are appointed by the judge. They are not supervised. They are considered a witness for the court. So they go and they talk to the families, and their opinion and perspective is given to the judge as a witness on the stand, and it is incredibly persuasive to a judge. A judge often has preferences as to who they want to see appointed to a case. The last thing I just want to point out is that as advocates for women and families, there has been a backlash against GALs and against judges who rely heavily on good GALs. So I would just like to point that out without putting an opinion out there, that when we're talking about finding GALs, paying for GALs, there is a political motivation and tension that makes being a GAL a sometimes unsafe position to have in Connecticut at this time. And I'm happy to take that offline to talk with anyone. I hope that helps.
That does help. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Taya, so much for coming in with that. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Senator Martha Marks, for your question. Anyone else have any questions regarding these two topics?
So just to piggyback on Taya, you know, I started with an enthusiastic GALs are advocates for the voices of the children and the best interest, and also the parent, and really having a really deep understanding of what is the family structure and dynamic when it comes to violence in the home. If GALs are not being supervised in a clear way, obviously, and the judges are putting such a big, you know, their decision or their thoughts about it helps make a decision on the case, then I think it should be mandatory that GALs have to go through trainings, and maybe those trainings need to be with judges and GALs at the same time. I know it is very difficult because of timing for that, but then they would be all in one room so that they can start building that relationship to really what matters, which is to end the cycle of violence and what is the best interest of the child. And on top of it, even if there is a GAL, abusers bring attorneys to these hearings as well. And that increases intimidation for the victim, the adult victim. And so what ends up happening is the abuser, the GL, kind of doesn't even know what's going on, usually meets with the family the day of the hearing in the morning before they're about to go in, instead of being mandated to do really the process of investigation, which should be within that month before the hearing. And then on top of it, you have the abuser with an attorney. So I go back to the financial abuse. I go back to how do we get into legislation, some sort of legal incubator. So we all have attorneys that do free consultations, right? Pro bono for consultation, but not for representation. And that is really what is lacking here when a victim has dealt with financial abuse. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Paola. Yes, I would agree on the representation bit for sure. It is very hard for folks to find this. Does anyone else have any additional comments, concerns, questions regarding these first two topics? We'd also like to as well open it up to any additional topics that folks may have brought to this roundtable, whether it's anything revolving around domestic violence and sexual assault. Does anyone have any additional information they want to share?
I think right now would be a great time to also hear from Executive Director Beth Hamilton and also Liza Andrews, who is the Policy Director at Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, because I know they have some things to share. One thing that kind of spins into something that they have seen, and I think one of them will be talking about, is affordable housing issue here. And in the way to tie it in with sexual assault, domestic violence survivors and victims is trying to find affordable housing for those survivors and victims. It's something that here at Women and Family Life Center, this is something we are seeing. And I know that these other state coalitions are also unfortunately seeing and struggling with this as well. So I just want that topic up, and feel free to whoever wants to kind of jump in. Thanks.
I can go ahead and start if that's okay, Liza. One of the things, and again, my name is Beth Hamilton. I'm with the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and it's wonderful to see some of you that I've been working with before, some I'm getting to meet for the first time in this virtual setting. So thank you so much for bringing us all together, Jenny and team. One of the things that's interesting, and we're talking a lot about domestic violence this morning, is that there's really clear links between childhood sexual abuse and all of the topics we're talking about, housing being one of them, domestic violence through partner violence, homelessness, addiction, mental health issues, lots of physical health issues and ailments. All of those things are linked back to childhood experiences of sexual violence, which is incredibly common. And so a lot of the work that we do as a coalition is really focused specifically in that area to not only provide survivors with the resources they need to heal, seek justice, and, sort of have holistic well-being, but we're also thinking a lot about how are we setting up systems to respond better to survivors, and then how are we ultimately doing that prevention work to create a healthier, Connecticut and our communities. Some of the things we're going to focus on this session are really going to be around codifying and kind of making parity in the rights of survivors to some other survivors of violence that have these protections. Two places. One is protecting victims from discrimination. Right now, domestic violence victims are the only victims of crime that have specific protections in the areas of employment, housing, public accommodations, and credit transactions. What we like to do is include victims of sexual violence, but also all victims. There's some great models. A handful of other states, about 6 states, have added all victims of crime to their anti-discrimination protection statutes, and that's something that we would love to see happen also. A second piece we would love to do is expand paid family medical leave and family medical leave to include victims of sexual violence. I should note that we worked with CHRO. They're supportive, obviously, of the anti-discrimination statute. So everything I'm talking about, I should start out by saying we have been working with legislators, we've been working with law enforcement, we've been working with policymakers, state agencies. All of this is stuff I'm bringing to you that has a more broad-based support that we've been working on. The second area, paid family medical leave and family medical leave, we passed some safe leave laws in our state, but that only includes victims of intimate partner violence or quote unquote family violence as described in the legislation. Those same disruptions are the disruptions that parents of children who've experienced sexual abuse or survivors of sexual abuse experience themselves. And so we want to make sure that they're not only as protections in being able to take leave from work to do things like attend court proceedings, go to mental health appointments, things like that, but also that you get paid during that time. So we're looking and working with the Paid Family Medical Leave Authority or Paid Family Leave Authority. I'm getting it probably wrong. And they also, again, are sort of thinking about the solvency of that, right? It's 2 years in to working on that, and they want it to exist for a very long time, which we also support. We believe that adding victims of sexual violence to this one would create solvency or keep solvency within that fund, and also would protect a number of victims who would find that really helpful to be able to step away from work and focus on them and their families' well-being. The next area, which I'm guessing most of you are familiar with, the Conn versus Yale decision. This is a decision which was then upheld in October by the U.S. Appeals Court, which essentially says that while most students believe that going into and reporting Title IX claims of sexual misconduct, for example, because it's a quasi-judicial process, that it would be protected and confidential. In this specific case, and what the U.S. Appeals Court held up is that all of those things can be used, those disclosures, which again were just about students reporting to campuses or other institutions, the fact that they experience sexual misconduct or sexual violence, that is then used by the folks who cause harm to create defamation suits. So this is something that we're seeing more and more be widespread. California is the only state, that passed AB 399 last session that has passed legislation that protects that kind of confidential disclosure so that it cannot be weaponized into a defamation suit for somebody who wants to report sexual abuse or sexual violence. We also overall see, and this is one of the places that I have had just wonderful conversations with some of the chiefs down in your neck of the woods and also some from across the state. And we have gotten really, really amazing support for this. One of the things that we know about historically is that sexual violence remains both the least prosecuted crime and the least reported crime. When we celebrated as a state about a year ago, our uniform crime stats and said, wow, look at Connecticut, every instance of violent crime is decreasing except for a 24% increase in forcible rape. We have to pay attention to the places where we still are not, quote unquote, getting it right when it comes to systems-based responses. And in particular, survivors of sexual violence in our coalition. We have folks here who work as advocates, like CCADV's advocates in member centers that cover the whole state. We also have a team of attorneys who work 90% of the time with just victims of of sexual violence. And then we also have post-conviction victim advocates that are in every single sex offender supervision unit in the state of Connecticut who are representing the voices of victims. So we really see sort of the whole range of the criminal justice response sort of through and then post adjudication. And so it's interesting that, you know, we continue to see just really poor outcomes for survivors and poor experiences going through those systems. One of the things in Connecticut is that they're right now at the cadet level, police only get 8 hours of what we would call rape crisis intervention. That or 4 hours, excuse me. I'm sorry. I apologize. I have two things in front of me right now. Let me open up this other one. So 4 hours of sexual assault response with 40 minutes of required breaks. So I'll let you do the math and how often or how much cadets are getting trained. There also is no ongoing training when it comes to folks who are doing the investigations. And one of the things we really talked a lot about, we did a great screening of a film called Victim Suspect, which I really would recommend watching. It's on Netflix if you have not. We brought the filmmaker and some survivors. We are also in a state that has 3 of the most high-profile cases of us arresting victims of sexual violence for false reporting who were actually assaulted. These are 3 cases. Again, there are cases all over across the country, but in these 3 cases, a lot of that came down to poor police training and poor police response. In our state, we do not give police the opportunity to learn a lot of skills when it comes to trauma-informed interviewing, trauma-informed investigations. If you look at what is offered through the academy right now, almost exclusively folks get skills around interventions with suspects. So what happens in cases like sexual violence that revolve around a lot of interviewing and a lot of different sort of nuanced investigative techniques, it means that they don't have the skills that they need. One of the things that the chiefs of chiefs and a lot of other law enforcement agencies have come out and support with us is having additional training for ongoing officers. So if you want to investigate crimes in the state of Massachusetts, you must receive a 40-hour training to be able to do those investigations well. We'd like to look at something like that. So getting support for cadets and then ongoing support for law enforcement. We also in the state of Connecticut have never codified the creation of a model sexual assault policy for law enforcement or for the criminal justice response. We have 15 other model policies, including one for domestic violence and a number of other things. That's a place also that we really need to bolster and ensure that, again, we sort of putting those best practices in writing so folks can go back and be able to see what those are and be trained on those. We also right now are having challenges with emergency departments turning away survivors who want to get sexual assault evidence collected. What we would like to do is codify the right for every survivor, every person who experiences sexual violence to be able to go into an emergency department and have evidence collected and not be turned away. And then the final thing is in thinking about kind of the responses to domestic violence similarly, right now, if somebody experiences family violence, partner violence, domestic violence, they would be given information by those first responders. So being able to hand out information about resources, services that are available, things like that is something that we'd also like to codify for first responders to be able to share. The last 2 quick things are really DCJ-led initiatives, but I do think they're important for you all to hear. We have had so far 2 state Supreme Court rulings where we have overturned charges against those who have caused harm because children cannot orient to the exact day, time, and location of ongoing abuse for every single instance of abuse. So with our current laws, and because we do not have laws that account for continuous course of conduct, what that means is that we're going to keep having places where folks are being charged for the harm that they cause, and those charges are then being erased because a child cannot describe the exact time, location, and place of every single instance of ongoing sexual violence that they experience. Adding continuous course of conduct, just that simple phrase, to both sexual intercourse and sexual contact in our bills would change that entirely and would allow those folks who are being able to be held accountable. And then finally, we like to codify, and this goes back a little bit to the coercive control conversation folks were having, a little bit different, but similar in nature. We would like to codify non-physical compulsion or force in second and third degree sexual assault. What that means is that most perpetrators of sexual violence use things like threats, coercion. Most people don't use weapons, and most people are not physically assaulted when they're sexually assaulted. However, in order to get those charges, you must use the threat of physical force. We know that that's just not the tactics that folks use. And so in second and third degree sexual assault, we want to codify a definition of force that includes non-physical compulsion, similar to some of the coercive control things, although those are misdemeanors that you saw passed recently around domestic violence. So that is a ton of stuff. I'm sorry, that's probably more Jenny than you bargained for, but I want to make sure a lot of it kind of overlaps with the work that we've talked about already this morning, but I want to make sure that folks are sort of, aware of the full sort of breadth and scope of the issues we've been working on.
Thank you so much, Beth. We appreciate that. That was a ton of information. I want everybody to sit with that for a minute before we move on. And I'm going to throw it to Jenny, who's had her hand raised.
As always, Beth, you have great information to share, so thank you for that. I would actually love to invite Beth or one of her team members to actually join us on the task force so we can learn more about this and how we can get involved and support you all and these legislative priorities during this legislative session. I think they do affect everybody in Connecticut, but the Shoreline is not excluded from this. So please, let's get this on the task force priority so we can help support you with these things, because they're extremely important. There was a question that came up from Wendy, and it is a topic that has actually come up since the very first legislative roundtable about 5 years ago, I think. And it's in regards to Aaron's Law. And Wendy was saying, any updates on Aaron's Law? My child's school system is not doing any sexual assault prevention work in the elementary school level. And I know that this something that was passed a long time ago to get that really into the K through 12 schools. And it is supposed to be being done, but we are hearing for years now that it is not happening in every school district. And I know the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence has been working hard on that. So I'm not sure if Beth, if you have any quick updates that we can share with Wendy on that.
Absolutely. So I would agree with you as somebody who worked on that legislation when I had very small children and now have much older children. I'm also much more concerned with what is happening in their schools. We actually have created an entire survey. We first created the survey in 2019. It was the last meeting I had before we sent everybody home for 2 weeks at the start of the pandemic. So what we have done is partner with the Department of Children and Families, the Connecticut Association of Schools, the Connecticut State Department of Education, and Department of Public Health to create a comprehensive survey that would be required for all principals to fill out. It would go out through the commissioner of STE, who would require the superintendents to then have their districts, which would mean the principals would fill it out. What I would say anecdotally we see also right now is that this is not happening. And that's what we've seen, pre-pandemic. It certainly has not gotten better post-pandemic, if that's where we are. And so this survey is really a tool for us to gather information to then be able to go back and talk about what might additionally be needed in terms of maybe the training that folks need. Maybe there needs to be more of a requirement of information about trainings that have happened going back to the legislature. If you keep in mind when Aaron's Law was passed here in Connecticut, there is no accountability structure, right? So there is no requirement, like when we pass stuff for campuses, we require that reports go back to higher ed. There's a lot more kind of, it's not only super comprehensive, if I'm being super honest, right? But there is something there that requires an accountability mechanism that doesn't exist for Aaron's Law. So what we passed the legislation and said is we want everybody to do this. We think it's important. We establish some guidelines for elementary, middle, and high schools, but there is no mechanism that holds them accountable to doing that. And really what we found is specifically around elementary schools is that there's almost no education that's happening. And that some of what is happening is just not trauma-informed or research-informed, right? So not always super helpful and not necessarily creating safer communities or schools. What we hope that this research that we're doing, again, this Yale Evaluation Center, the folks that are the researchers working with us, when we gather this information from schools, what we will be looking at then is what are sort of the policy implications. So what do we need to then require of schools to do, or what tools have they not been given to be able to be successful at it? Maybe that's why they're not doing it. And then we really want to uphold, we know that there's a couple districts in this state. I'm from West Hartford. They do a really great job. I do some of the training there with them. We know there's some champions out there who are saying like, this is really possible. And not only is it possible to do it, but it's really worthwhile to do it. And so we want to create, some toolkits and sort of hold up those folks who are championing that work. So I do think what you will not see is this session that happening because the survey has not gone out yet. But I do expect next session, what you will see is for sure something around going back into Aaron's Law and looking at either how we create more data collection, because it's another place we don't really do a great job of as a state, but how do you create mechanisms for accountability, perhaps within the schools might also be something we look at next session.
Great, thank you. And I encourage any of the representatives and senators that are on this to please take notice of this, because this is something that has come up year after year. And it is a concern on the shoreline as well as the entire state, but we would encourage you to get involved and support this in some way, shape, or form after the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence finds out what the results are from the surveys. But it is something extremely important. Prevention can help end sexual violence. So it's really important that we start at a very young age for children. Representative Parker?
Thanks. Thanks, Beth, for all that you shared. I have one specific question about a piece of that, and maybe even if you just want to connect with me after, that'd be great. But in terms of victims getting turned away from EDs when they're trying to get that screening, wondering if you have a sense of why that's happening. We're hearing a lot about ED overcrowding in general, and so I wonder if it's sort of a byproduct of that, or is there something specific, and wondering if there's any legislation we can do and what we can help about it. So we'd love to talk to you about that more.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to talk offline. I put my email in the chat, but I mean, I can briefly answer that by saying that it generally has sometimes to do with bias and just misunderstanding. So we've had instances where folks say, okay, this person could not possibly have been sexually assaulted. There was a woman with dementia who talked about her husband assaulting her. Her husband died before, her. And so folks were saying that couldn't be the case. And so, there was not an investment in having evidence collected. In reality, she was being sexually assaulted and couldn't name the person. Folks with mental health challenges or, different issues around mental health have been turned away. We've had sex workers who have been turned away because folks have said, oh no, I know what you do in the community. Like, you can't be sexually assaulted. When I was an advocate for one of our programs years ago, I was with somebody who was known to the ED to be quote unquote what they called a frequent flyer. So spent more time in the emergency department and absolutely experienced sexual violence, but was, they tried to turn her away from having evidence collected because they thought that she was just, trying to spend time in the emergency department. And if anybody knows anything about having evidence collected, it is not an enjoyable experience. So it really would be a terrible way to spend time. So a lot of it is just misinformation and just bias, I think, that has, created situations where folks feel like they're able to make determinations about folks' lived experiences that probably is not realistic for, sort of the role or the training that they have.
Thank you, Representative Parker. Yes, thank you, Representative Parker, for the question. Thank you, Beth, for answering. At this time, we're going to transition into Liza, Director of Public Policy and Communications at CCADV. So Liza, if you want to step in and share your legislative priorities.
Sure, I'll be quick. Ashley already kind of laid out one of our, big priorities for the session around information to pregnant and postpartum folks. I do want to just quickly comment. There was a mention before of affordable housing. That's top on our policy agenda. That is the biggest need we see among survivors, access to safe, affordable housing that they can move to. It is difficult to leave if you have nowhere to go. Our shelter system pre-pandemic ran at 125% capacity throughout the year. Post-pandemic, we've been running over 150% capacity, which just means that our shelters are full year round. The most concerning thing that I've seen this past year is the average length of stay in our shelters crept over 60 days. So that's up about 20 days than it had been in years past. Nobody wants to live in shelter. Shelter is definitely not a 60-day solution. It should be a temporary solution to an emergency situation. What we need to do is have access to affordable housing that survivors can move to permanently. So you're going to hear CCADV be much more vocal in policies and proposals around affordable housing, because it is such a dire need for survivors and their safety right now. One other big piece that we will be working on this year, a bill that we did first introduce last year, is around relief from coerced debt. Senator Cohen was our champion on that. We are planning to reintroduce it this year. This is just going to create a process, both, it can start out of court with a creditor, with a banking organization, where coerced debt has been created for a victim. Coerced debt can come in a lot of forms. It can be the abuser forcing the victim to fraudulently sign legal documents. It can be incurring debt without the survivor's consent, coercing the survivor to incur debt under threat. So there's a lot of ways that debt ends up being coerced for survivors, and the long-term impacts are huge, because that debt, and then also often the resulting poor credit score, prevent that survivor from moving forward with accessing affordable housing, with education, with a lot of things. So we want to start to try to get at that. We had really great support in the banking committee last year. It did pass the Senate unanimously, and we're just gonna get it over the finish line going through the House this year. Senator Cohen, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, again, as a champion of that bill.
Thanks, Liza. I mean, you really covered it. It's something that we absolutely need to get done. I think as we put the bill forward, we heard from more and more folks impacted by coerced debt. And so I'm really excited about moving it along. We did have some hiccups, in particular with one legislator in the House who was concerned about it from a legal perspective. We're really working to perfect the bill, with Liza and Megan and all the folks at CCADV to make sure that, we've got the good standing of other states who have passed this before us, and we know that it'll hold up. So we're just working out those details now and looking forward to getting this over the finish line next session.
Yep, and I would say, just again, quickly, I know we're starting to run out of time, and a few folks still have some questions. We're economic justice, self-sufficiency, again, these are huge, huge things that are what help keep survivors safe, what gives them the ability to leave. One of the biggest predictors of whether or not a survivor can stay away from their abuser is their degree of economic independence. So you're also going to hear CCADV be more vocal on a lot of economic justice policies, equal pay initiatives. We definitely support the expansion of paid sick time. I saw Nicole from She Leads Justice was on. I don't know if she still is on. She Leads Justice is spearheading the expansion of paid sick days, and CCADV certainly supports that. So I think that sums it up again with our birthing hospital bill. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I see some raised hands if folks want to kind of just step in and take this opportunity right now to have their questions answered. So Senator Martha Marks, I see your hand raised, and then Representative Moira Rader.
Yeah, hi. Excuse me. I had raised it last time. I was just, and if it's too late to ask this question, that's fine. Are there studies? What is it reported on sexual abuse that happens in nursing homes and assisted living or with the elderly? We know it's out there if you talk to people that work in skilled nursing facilities and assisted livings, but I don't know if it is ever reported and if there is legislation out there for that.
There's not specific legislation. I mean, what we see is kind of, you use nationally representative data to show that there is probably a larger likelihood that somebody from, who is in that community is likely to experience sexual violence. So we certainly work on a number of cases where that has happened. There's not specific legislation. I know at one point there was legislation that looked at whether or not folks who've committed sexual harm could be in, assisted living facilities, things like that, which did not really go anywhere and is a bit complicated. But so I think there's lots of folks that work. SAGE is an organization that works a lot on sexual violence within, older folks' communities. And so I think that there is an overrepresentation of survivors in those communities, but I don't think that there's necessarily a really targeted response that we've seen around that. So we do lots of training and things like that, but I think it's probably it'd be a harder challenge to have specific legislation around, what that would look like in assisted living communities. But I don't know if there's a specific, are you looking for training necessarily for like staff members that work with that population, or more thinking around interventions for folks, survivors themselves?
Or just if it's reported and what's acceptable and what isn't. I mean, I don't want to sound flippant, but you will hear, people working in the nursing home facilities or the assisted livings, and I see patients in assisted livings, and oh yeah, we found him in bed with so and so last night, or this one, jumps, and they might just lie in bed and just because they have dementia. But I have also heard other things, other stories. So I don't know if that's reported or not.
Some of it is. I mean, and the challenge is very often, even when it is reporting, there's not always good outcomes for folks because there's not always another placement for that person to go into. So we often get involved, like our attorneys, for example, have been involved in several cases where that is, ongoing abuse is happening. It's been identified. I would say it's not reported probably as frequently as it should be, or identified as frequently as it should be, which might go back again to a training issue. But I would say that there are larger structural challenges for that population to be able to find respite from abuse, right? So, a number of cases where folks have reported things and we have not been able to identify alternative placements based on the kind of needs that the survivor has and the kind of needs that the person causing harm has, and those being only available in very specific locations in our state. And then when it comes to resources, again, if you're dependent on a certain kind of care for a certain cost, there are even less opportunities for folks to move. So I do think that there's some structural challenges there when it comes to that abuse being reported, but I don't think it's reported as often as it happens, for sure.
Thank you. And Representative Moira Rader with your question.
Thank you. I'll be brief. On the issue of debt, I'm curious to know, and we may not have this answer either. I keep asking questions, we might not have answers, but around medical debt, do we see an increased incidence of this, obviously around domestic violence or sexual violence victims? Christine has been a great advocate and is working on this bill around, coercive debt, but I'm just curious if you found in your experience that they're also carrying excessive medical debt due to injuries or needing to go to the ER and things like that.
I am not sure, Ashley. I don't know if you're aware of anything. Medical debt is something that that survivors, if it was an injury related to domestic violence, and the same would apply if it was an injury related to sexual violence, they would be able to potentially seek victim compensation to help pay for what is not covered by health insurance. So that is one option for folks with medical debt. Again, it has to be that injury has to be directly related to the crime, but that would be something that victim comp could cover.
Right, if the crime is prosecuted. But
It's not that for victims of domestic violence and sexual violence, that is
okay,
not.
good. Okay, thank you.
They don't even,
And
victims of domestic
victim
violence and sexual
compensation.
violence don't even need to file a police report to qualify for victim compensation.
The only issue with victim compensation, which we do use, Liza, quite a bit, for injuries, it's a reimbursement. Usually they're already getting the bill and are being requested to at least put in some of the money for it, like a payment towards that medical bill. Since COVID, and it has not reduced here on this part of the state, is that there is more injuries and more hospitalizations for victims. And if you add, if they're non-documented and then they have zero health insurance, they have thousands of dollars as well. So we're talking with victims of crime that are US citizens that are going to be requesting reimbursement, but they still have to put something up front. And then the addition with the non-documented victims that are here with U visas that actually have thousands of dollars of medical bills. They don't know how they're going to be able to pay. So And these are specific to sexual assault or domestic violence injuries of crime.
Thank you, Representative Radar, for your question, and Paula and Liza for chiming in with your answer. I wanted to give Ann Malice a chance to ask her question as well. She had her hand raised.
I just was going to speak on, we passed it, but I just wanted to, Beth had mentioned a case with a senior person who couldn't identify the person who was sexually assaulting them because that they were identifying them as their husband. And I think in these cases, quite often, these are the dynamics that go on where they cannot articulate clearly who or what's happening, or it doesn't make sense to people because of cognitive things that are going on with them. And so therefore, these cases don't always get taken seriously. People might not, there might be even parts of the kit, if they do go for a kit, that don't get performed because they can't explain well what happened to them. So they might not do portions of the kit thinking there wasn't any direct penetration happening in the assault because they aren't able to, say it. So training, again, I think this really goes back to training within all these systems that work with people who possibly are facing these issues. That's all.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for that additional comment. I wanted to kind of just chime in very quick, just to encourage folks on here to come attend our Shoreline Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Task Force. We'll be meeting Thursday, January, let me just confirm before I say it, Thursday, January 25th, 9 to 10 a.m. at the Women and Family Life Center Carriage House on 96 Fair Street. We come together and we continue these conversations, we continue the advocacy. So we just want to encourage anyone here today to come to those meetings. So I'll pass it off to Melissa, and then Melissa can go from there.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you to everybody who joined us today as we wrap it up. I just wanted to give a small shout out to Melanie and to Jenny, our Executive Director, Referral Navigator, for putting this together today. This has been a wonderful, great open discussion, a very comfortable discussion for some really difficult topics. So thank you to them. And also a quick shout out tomorrow for those of you who are in the Guilford area. We are having a community event here at 96 Fair Street in our carriage house. It's meant for the holidays. It's an open house. Come by, chat with staff, have some refreshments. Thank you to Senator Christine Cohen, to Cohen's Bagels, for donating some bagels, some refreshments to us, and just stop by and say hi and spend some time with us here at Women and Family Life. So thank you again. And I'm going to send it over to Jenny for one last thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to Melissa and Melanie for really taking all the time and putting this together. I think it's been very successful. We've had a lot of great participation, and I really just want everyone to keep this momentum going so we can make some change in our communities. So please get involved in the task force. If you haven't, reach out to the center. I put my contact information, Melanie's as well as Melissa's, in the chat. I just want to take a moment again to thank all of our senators and representatives who joined us today. I did see Guilford's first selectman, Matt Hoy, here. So yay, Matt, thanks for joining us. A couple of our board members, Lynn Pinder, Martina Jacober, Taya Burke-Martin, who's also one of our facilitators, as well as Connor Dolan. And of course, thank you, Beth and Liza, for joining us and sharing the information that your statewide coalitions are doing. And a big shout out to the partners and everyone who are currently on the Shoreline Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Task Force. This work couldn't be done without you. And please, if you want to get involved, join us. We really want to see some of these things go forward so we can help those that we are all serving. And thank you to our first responders who are on here. And shout out to my team at the Women and Family Life Center. You guys are amazing. Thank you for all your hard work. And everyone, if you need us, call us. We're here to help those during difficult life transitions. All of our services are free. And from all of us here at Women and Family Life Center, we wish you a wonderful and happy holidays. Thanks, everybody.